All right, let's get into a really fascinating story. We're going to talk about a piece of retro tech that was on one hand an absolute marvel of engineering, and on the other, a spectacular commercial failure. I'm talking about a format that tried to put movies on something that looks and feels a whole lot like a vinyl record.
And honestly, that was the initial hook. Just holding one of these things. This quote says it all. This feels incredible. You can just imagine it, right? Browsing a wall of movies with these huge, beautiful, album-sized covers, reading the synopsis in big, clear print. It was a physical, tactile experience that, our digital world just can't replicate. So what exactly was this thing?
Well, it all started with this one simple question that RCA tried to answer. Back then, the undisputed king of home media was the vinyl record for music. So their thinking was, why not do the exact same thing for movies? It was, in theory, a brilliant and totally logical idea.
And this was their answer. The CED, which stands for Capacitance Electronic Disc. This was the heart and soul of their whole SelectaVision system. And spoiler alert, it would go on to become one of RCA's biggest, most infamous flops of all time.
But you can see the appeal they were going for. The whole user experience was a big part of it. You'd slide this really chunky caddy into the player, and it would neatly grab the disc, leaving you with the empty sleeve. And you'd hear this incredibly satisfying sound as it loaded up. Plus, it had one huge leg up on the competition at the time. No rewinding necessary.
So how did this whole ambitious project even get started? Well, this was no overnight idea. This was a massive, massive undertaking for RCA, a quest that ended up spanning more than a decade and a half.
The journey actually begins all the way back in 1964. The goal was pretty simple and kind of noble, really. Bring movies into the average person's home. And to do it affordably, they looked straight to the music industry. The plan was to use an easily stamped vinyl disc, just like a record, to keep the cost down for absolutely everyone. But what they thought would be relatively straightforward turned into this epic 15-year development cycle. I mean, they had a working prototype by 1972, which is pretty amazing, but it could only hold 10 minutes of color video. It took them another 9 long years of work before it was finally ready for the public in 1981.
And that long development time, well, that was the core of the problem. Because by the time this brilliant idea finally launched, the world had completely changed. It was entering a market that was already crowded, and unfortunately for RCA, the CED had some serious flaws.
The single most frustrating flaw was the constant skipping, just like a scratch record, but honestly, probably worse. Even with a disc that's been perfectly protected its entire life, the viewing experience was just riddled with jumps and glitches. As this quote puts it perfectly, that is really annoying.
And when you look at the competition, you can really see the terrible position the CED was in. It was truly the worst of both worlds. See, it had the same big disadvantages as the higher quality Laserdisc, limited playtime per side and no ability to record TV. But its video quality was only about as good as VHS, which could record TV and held way more content on a single tape.
So all these issues really meant this thing was likely doomed from the start. It skipped all the time. The tiniest speck of dust could create a ton of visual noise and static. You had to get up and flip the disc in the middle of most movies. You couldn't record your favorite shows. And to top it all off, it launched with a teeny tiny library of only 50 movies.
But here's the twist in the story. While it was a massive failure in the marketplace, the technology itself is absolutely mind-blowing. The science behind how they actually managed to get video onto a vinyl disc is an astounding feat of engineering.
Okay, so how in the world did they do it? A normal record player works by having a stylus vibrate in a wavy groove. Pretty straightforward. But a CED is way more complex. The stylus doesn't vibrate. Instead, it has this tiny titanium electrode that measures the electrical charge, the capacitance, between itself and the disc. And that charge changes based on the depth of the groove. And that incredibly complex signal is then turned into a video picture.
The whole process was just this 4-step marvel of precision. First, the disc spins incredibly fast. A diamond stylus then has to track through grooves that are way too small for the human eye to even see. As it does that, it's measuring these tiny changes in electrical charge and then somehow converts that complex signal into the movie you see on your screen. Just wow.
So to put that spin speed into perspective for you, a typical audio record spins at about 33 RPM. To get a stable video signal, this CED had to spin at a staggering 450 RPM. We are talking more than 13 times faster. It's a speed that was absolutely necessary just to keep the picture from falling apart. And the data density is just unbelievable. An audio record might have a few hundred grooves per inch, but to store an entire movie, the CED needed to pack in 9,541 grooves per inch. That is miles and miles of information crammed into a space you can't even perceive.
At this microscopic scale, the precision had to be absolutely perfect. The force of the stylus on the disc couldn't be, say, 2 grams like on a record player. It had to be dialed into an impossibly light 0.065 grams. That's lighter than a feather, with almost zero room for error. And that extreme delicacy, well, that explains why even a tiny speck of dust could wreak total havoc on the picture.
So with all that incredible science, why did this brilliant piece of engineering fail so hard? Well, the answer is pretty simple, and it's a lesson that still applies today. Sometimes brilliant tech just isn't enough.
By the time the CED finally launched in 1981, the home video war was practically over. VHS and Laserdisc had already been on the market for years, and just a few years later, the rise of video rental stores like Blockbuster cemented VHS as the undisputed king. By 1986, just 5 years after its launch, RCA pulled the plug.
Now, the one advantage RCA did have was price. At $500, the player was way cheaper than the early VHS machines, and the discs themselves were pretty affordable. But that single advantage, it just couldn't make up for the constant skipping, the lack of a recording feature, and the simple fact that it was years late to the party.
So after 15 years of incredible research and development, after solving engineering problems that seemed impossible, the final verdict was simple, and it was unavoidable. It was just too little, too late. And that's really the story of the RCA SelectaVision, a beautiful, flawed, brilliant failure that leaves us with a really critical question to think about. In the race for innovation, can incredible engineering ever truly make up for just plain bad timing?